Hello and welcome to Dialogue. 2026 marks the opening year of China's 15th five-year plan, a moment when economic planning meets a far more complex global environment. Slower global growth, rising geopolitical tensions, and structural pressures at home are reshaping how China thinks about development, reform, and opening up. So what kind of economic roadmap is China setting for the next 5 years? And how is policy adapting to weaker demand, greater competition, and growing uncertainty? And where do opportunities lie for foreign investors as the country pushes for higher level opening up? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Professor He Ping, Associate Dean of the School of Economics and Management at Tsinghua University, Carlo Diego D'Andrea, Vice President and Shanghai Chapter Chair of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, Alfredo Montufar-Helu, Managing Director of Ankura China Advisors, and also David Mahon, Executive Chairman of Mahon China Investment. Welcome to the show. So we'll start with Professor He Ping. If you look at China's second largest economy in the world, but we know there's a 5% of economic growth. At the same time, we do talk about the challenges both domestically and externally. I mean, how do you characterize the environment of China's economic growth, in particular the prospect in 2026?
I think China is facing a fast-changing environment, both externally but also internally. Externally, I think China is actively seeking new markets because we all know that the European markets as well as the market in the United States has reached its capacity. Both the debt level in Europe, EU, as well as in the United States has reached a record high. So technically, they cannot support further growth of the trading deficit with China in the future. So China externally is actively seeking new markets for its export. And internally, I think China has passed the stage of fast and low quality growth. We are trying to obtain high quality growth in the near future. So we're trying to improve the efficiency of the market operation as well as a new technology application in the economic growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, you have been in China for years. You are following China development closely. Share with us, especially for our viewers who are not familiar with the China economy, what are some of the priorities for the Chinese economy, for example, in 2026 and probably the next 5 years?
The problem that China currently faces with oversupply, the concerns they have that growth is slowing down, is because there's an addiction to GDP growth, as there has been globally. It's a narrow focus, and it misses many aspects of society and also the drivers within an economy that actually are more subtle. And in China's case, there is the potential for real leverage. This is one of the most decentralized economies in the world, something most people don't realize. They see it as very much government controlled. But the government does control the financial sector. Most of the banks, most funds and financial firms are state-owned. So they need to slow the credit down to first the state-owned enterprises, but also to the private companies where there is excess. This is just an ordinary market banking choice that you don't keep investing in sectors where margins are getting thinner, where there's oversupply, and therefore you've got very unhealthy price wars. So there are many tools at the government's disposal to sort out the big issue at the moment, which did exist in property and now is manifest in the industrial sector. I think they do understand it. So you change the KPI also of local officials. Party secretaries, mayors of towns, all of whom are trying to achieve their KPIs, which again are very much centered around fundamental economic growth in itself. So we can take slower growth and a more even economy. And lastly, China's capital market structure is actually still a real issue. You want to get the household savings moving, you want people to consume. let them have more confidence in China's capital markets. The government needs to look really carefully at what is being listed, make sure quality companies are attractive to domestic investors. So China's doing fine. The problems are not new, but there are many things that the government can do and initiate to try and resolve these issues, particularly oversupply.
Well, Carlo Diego, if you look at some of the numbers recently released, for example, this official Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, which has suggested an unexpected, people would say, broad slowdown in January, with activity in the non-manufacturing sector contracting actually at the worst pace since late 2022. So what does that say about the economy? So particularly in non-manufacturing, probably the service economy, so it's weak, let's say?
As a chamber, we are one of the largest business associations present in the market, and every year we release our position paper, which contains suggestions to the central authority. This that you are mentioning a long-standing issue, and we provide macro suggestions. The first one, and I saw already in the studio was mentioned before, is fix the root cause of the involution, make trade fairer for the trade partners, and work in order to balance better supply and demand. I want to emphasize that the supply is one of the main problems, but overall in China, when we are outgoing the retail sales, if we check the data from January, August 2025 last year, a bit older than your data of today, you may see that there is a growth of 4.2%. So people are buying things. And this is the good news, because in Europe is an average of 2%. So the real issue is the problem is the external extreme supply of product, which grow by 6.3%. So in the market, you have more product comparing the things that people are buying. So what we are suggesting to the authority, especially now that we are going forward to the new 15 5-year plan, is to work in order to find balance between supply and demand, in order to improve the social security net, to let people have the willingness to spend a bit more, and to find a balance between the central direction and the local government expenditure. Because all the mayor and the party secretary in the region want to have champions in the automotive sector or in the pharmaceutical, or not, but this creates overcapacity. So we should work together in order to find a fine balance between this factor in the economy.
Okay, the key word is balance. And Alfredo, of course, we mentioned a little bit about this lack of demand or weak demand in the China economy. But according to Bain and Company, China's luxury sector showed signs of stabilization during the third quarter of 2025, and actually growth of 1 to 3% during this fourth quarter. This is mostly helped, as according to the company, by a stronger stock market and better consumer confidence. So at least we can say we are seeing this as a signs of a positive changes in terms of confidence of consumption.
I think you're hitting the right word, which is confidence. When I look at what's happening to the Chinese economy and at the growth headwinds that China is facing right now, even at involution, I see the main driver of all of this, the persistence of weak confidence in China. Now, of course, this means that people overall are spending less. Overall, they're saving more because of precautionary reasons. What we are seeing right now as the economy stabilizes is that there is more willingness to spend. There is a better feeling about the future. But of course, we are still facing pre-COVID, or we are still not back to the pre-COVID economic momentum that characterized China. So the question here right now that I think that we face, whether you are looking at the stock market, at the property market, or at involution itself, is what needs to happen? What needs to happen to break this cycle? What needs to happen to restore confidence? And I think it has to do with the structural reasons. I take Carlos' point about one of the key issues of China being too much production. But I think the main issue behind that, the reason why the production is not being absorbed by the demand in China is because people don't necessarily want to spend that money in new products, right? And that leads then to pressures on profits, which then leads to more competition, destructive competition, because companies have to produce more in order to get more market share, in order to survive. So it is a vicious cycle. Now, the good news is that the government really understands this. And this is why this year and over the 15 five-year plan period, we know that the government wants to pay more attention at consumption. And it's already talking about some of the key structural reforms that have to be implemented in order to make this happen. But I do want to put a word of caution to people who are listening to us, which is that we shouldn't expect this process of addressing these structural imbalances to be a short one. It will require time. And I think that therefore businesses need to adjust their expectations on how the market is going to rebound.
Mm-hmm. It takes time. It's not a short-term issue. Professor He Ping, I think, as a matter of fact, the central government has identified, strong supply and weak demand as the primary contradiction at present. Many people believe, just as Alfred said, this is not a short-term problem, but rather a structural issue, which is long-term, transition of economic development stages. Do you agree? It's a long-term issue, it's a structural issue. It will take time to solve or to deal with this, let's say, lack of confidence to consume or the enthusiasm to purchase more, to buy more here.
I do agree there's a huge structural issue here. One of the factors that could contribute to this low level of demand is the income distribution. For example, people would say we should have a large middle class in the economy. But in China, the middle class is relatively small portion in terms of total population. We have a triangle structure in terms of income structure as well as wealth distribution. For a long time, we have an export-oriented economic structure, economic growth structure. So we're trying to lower the labor cost as well. Some of the factor costs, for example, some materials, some agricultural products, the price of those products has been kept at a very relatively low level. And these contribute to the low income distribution, the large portion of low income distribution. So you can see the structure of the income distribution as well as the low cost in certain factor input contribute to is suitable for the old model of growth, which has strong emphasis on exports. But as for now, when we want to make more make a transition from outside external market to internal market, this income distribution kind of become a kind of barrier for the increase of the consumption. So that I certainly agree. This is a huge structure issue related to this kind of income distribution as well as low factor price in certain sector.
But David, of course, the Chinese government is also trying to build a unified national market. How much does that effort have to do with the domestic consumption or boosting domestic market vis-a-vis export-oriented economic growth model?
Export-oriented growth model is often given too much emphasis, that China is still recovering from the fact that depended on global markets to drive domestic growth. I think the domestic growth has been profound, and I think also, unlike the property sector, the Chinese government already realizes that it's got a real issue, particularly in high technology and the areas where it moved its investment emphasis. Whereas in the property sector, it was late in the day when the government acted against the imbalances in the sector. In this case, as we can see in the coming 5-year plan, there is a real awareness of what the problems are. They're being talked about openly. the government's almost challenging itself to come up with solutions. And there are many things it can do. At the same time, let's look at the global economy where everyone's consumption is low. There are varying forms of economic and market crises, largely because America is waging tariff wars and trade wars with everybody, both friend and foe alike. So there's good reason why people are nervous, people aren't investing, they're not employing. China is, in a sense, just like the rest of the world in some ways. Unlike the rest of the world, it still does have this tremendous domestic economy. There are a lot of things related to areas where cities are doing very, very well. And those are the ones where they've relaxed the hukou conditions. They're allowing more people to come in. It's picking up some of the excess housing stock. It's bringing in people with high skills to areas where they want to develop their industries. So there are many things that are going on. We've been waiting for the sky to fall in the economy, if you take outside observers, since COVID. It hasn't fallen. We have problems. They're not small problems, but they're ones I think the government is going to deal with. And those that foreign companies face are very similar to those faced by private companies. So one thing I would say in respect of Carlo, that we're all facing the same problems in the private sector. It's a bit difficult in some sectors for foreign companies, but we're really just suffering as the rest of the private sector are suffering. And the government knows that. They will fix our problems as they repair those for their own private sector.
Professor He Ping, as a Chinese, we know domestic challenges, external challenges. For example, this so-called choke points, from the U.S. For example, there's tax restrictions, entity list, a lot of pressure on Chinese companies in terms of access to, for example, advanced chips. You have to invest in this high-tech manufacturing, advanced manufacturing there. At the same time, you also want to boost your market. You want to boost consumption, right? This is also kind of let's say, contradiction there. You want to invest in both sectors, both areas. Can we do that?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think these two are not necessarily conflict to each other. To boosting both consumption and investment in certain technology area. Because we all know that savings equal to investment if we don't have external market, so on average. But technically, if we do have an international market, so technically saving does not necessarily equal to investment, right? Mm-hmm. So if we want to have both lower saving, but more investment, which means we invest more than what we save, technically we need to shrink our export, actually shrink our, trade surplus. In that way, we actually can boost both investment and consumption. So by saying that, technically, if China want to continue this export-oriented economy, we cannot achieve both. But if we say we reduce reliance on external market by investing in technology, at the same time boosting consumption, and these two can achieve simultaneously. I think this, macro level, we can make that claim. But in terms of policy, I think we should just actually, as I said, in order to boost domestic consumption, we actually need to increase, for example, reduce the number of low-income people, also increase labor cost, as well as increase certain factor cost.
So one thing that I want to say when I hear about this export-led model, for me, the fact that China is exporting is a byproduct of a supply-side economic model, which is very much dependent on investment. But the main idea is to produce. So whatever is on excess, it's exported. Now, here's the thing. If you look at everything that's been produced in China and you compare what's consumed here versus what's exported, actually the exports are very much a tiny quantity of what's consumed here, right? So there is overcapacity problem, definitely. There is no question about it. Now, here's the other thing. China right now has companies that produce products that are equal quality, if not above quality, to what foreign companies can offer, right? So if you increase the pocket size, the ability and willingness to spend of Chinese consumers, that doesn't necessarily will mean that they will increase the consumption of imports. It might mean that they will consume more China products because Chinese companies are offering good products at reasonable prices. And so it doesn't actually fix the trade surplus. Perhaps, of course, the impact of increasing income is by just actually meaning that labor costs rise, definitely impacts trade. But I don't necessarily follow that logic. And this is a logic that you hear from many decision makers in other countries, which mean, China, you need to rebalance your economy. And by rebalancing your economy, you're going to fix this issue. I actually think, well, no, maybe other countries will want to import more from China, like my own home country is doing, Mexico, because they see Chinese products as reasonably priced and good enough in terms of the quality that they can compete with the other foreign alternatives. So that's an interesting question, and I think that we will see develop over the next years, but definitely something to look at.
Absolutely interesting. I mean, fascinating there in terms of the theories, in terms of the reality there. But if you look at of course, the major relationship China has with the U.S., for example, the two presidents recently held a phone conversation, which is a pleasant one. Both sides basically acknowledge. Many are expecting a rather stable relationship for 2026 between the two economies. With meetings between the two leaders, 3, if not 4 times in 2026. So, Carlo, that will also provide some stability for both countries' economic expansion, let's say?
I want to be optimistic. This is very important, the leaders for this global market they meet. And a lot will be, the 2026 will be also a result of the outcome of these meetings. Because indeed, we like as Europeans to invest in China for the efficiency of the market, of the supply chain, but indeed also for the predictability that we had over the past few years. Coming back to the interesting discussion about the trade surplus and which one can be the right pills, red or blue pills, we don't have that. It should be a mix of activity. Definitely the investment of Chinese companies into Europe, bringing technology, bringing investment, this can help to balance the trade imbalance. And let's remember that China in the third quarter of 2025 reached 1 trillion surplus with many other countries. And if we continue to go on this export-led economy, by 2030 we will have over 40% of goods in our house made in China. And this can be good for the Chinese market and so on, but this will be very challenging on the part of other economies, and this may create tension and geopolitical friction among other countries. You mentioned Mexico, Alfredo, but Mexico was one of the latest countries which put trade defense against the new energy vehicle coming from China. I like that the EU and China, they are discussing. It's very important, this exchange of dialogue. And there was a good point of that statement on the new energy vehicle, which is very tiny part of the exchange between Europe and China. There are some historical issues like localization, market access restriction, competition by price competition. We should look in this one in order to improve the business environment.
Let me have Alfredo. I think Mexico imposed the tariff partly because of the U.S. The concern with the U.S. The U.S. obviously imposed pressure on Mexico government. But if you look at the recent, there's a visit Uruguay president in China. They enjoyed huge surplus from trading with China. But trade is always there. Some countries enjoy surplus, other countries probably deficit. But is that a problem?
I think that just talking from a trade perspective, there are many views. Whether you have a surplus, is that negative or positive? The reality is that for a country such as Mexico, for instance, a lot of the exports, the great majority, go to the US. And that drives a lot of Mexican GDP growth. So, of course, Mexico really prices the US market and access to it. When the threat is that they will close that market access to you, then the government has to consider that in their strategy towards other countries. Yes, I see that as one of the main drivers of why Mexico imposed tariffs on China. But there is another point here, and this is true, which is that the increase in exports or imports from China into Mexico are also displacing some companies, local companies, and they are leading actually to unemployment. So the Mexican government was trying to also address that impact. There is a solution, however, to this, which is Chinese companies investing in Mexico, creating capacity and creating jobs. That is a solution. And I think that also Europe is applying for that, is vying for that, and they're asking for technology from China. That also already shows you where China's level of development is compared to other countries, which is like really high. On the consumer aspect, consumers are not governments. Consumers do not impose tariffs. Consumers like the products, and they want to buy them in Europe and in Mexico.
That is true. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.
What's behind the next door? What motivates us to find the truth? To understand the world, we must see it from different angles. Never stop searching. Go deeper. Go further. Be open-minded. Be engaged. Open the door through dialogue, where ideas do matter.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.